So welcome everyone. I'm Jeannie Ralston. I'm the co-founder of NextTribe, as you all know, or many of you know. We haven't done one of these in a while because I kind of took a summer break, but I'm thrilled to be back with our author interviews, especially because it's such an amazing book. We Are Not Like Them is really riveting. It's suspenseful. And it's got so much heart too. And the authors are here with us tonight. They're Christine Pride, hi Christine, and Joe Piazza. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about them both. But first, I want to just tell you that I knew Christine from way back. She was my editor when I wrote my memoir about lavender. So she knows way too much about me, I'm sure. So
I know a lot about Jeannie, and for a while, everything, for like 6 months, everything in my office smelled like lavender. It was a beautiful experience. Like anybody walking by was like, oh my God, your office smells like lavender, because Jeannie would always send me these beautiful little, gifts and candles, and I mean, it was amazing.
It was a built-in, I had built-in gifties, to send out, all little sachet, little candle, little. So it was really fun. But but she's gone from, I mean, you still do consulting, editorial consulting, but you were on staff at all the big publishers. I think the last one was Simon & Schuster.
Mm-hmm.
But she's held editorial posts at many different trade imprints, including Doubleday, Broadway, Crown, Hyperion. Somebody. And as an editor, Christine has published a range of books with a special emphasis on inspirational stories and memoirs, including numerous New York Times bestsellers. Mine wasn't, but that's okay.
But it was an inspirational memoir. It was certainly very inspirational.
Thank you, Christine.
Very powerful story.
Thank you. And Joe is an award-winning journalist, editor, and podcast host. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, CNN, Marie Claire, Glamour, and other notable publications. She's written a lot of books too. Charlotte Walsh Likes to Win, How to Be Married, The Knockoff, Fitness Junkie, and If Nuns Ruled the World. I want to read If Nuns Ruled the World. That sounds like my kind of book.
That one is my personal favorite. And I was with Christine today getting these emails that the nuns that I interviewed for the book, and there's 10 feminist badass nuns that I interviewed for the book, are now reading We Are Not Like Them. And so I'm now on like this nun chat, and they're all like, well, I like this part of it.
Oh
like,
my God.
Yeah, once you start reporting on nuns, they never leave you.
I went to Catholic school, so I understand. So we're going to start out. We've got so much to talk about, really. But I want to start out with a little bit of a reading here, just to give you a flavor for the writing. So I'm going to turn it over to you too.
Yes, I'll start. So we're each going to read different sections. I'm going to start from earlier in the book. This is a section in one of Jen's chapters. Jen's really first chapter, and we've seen our two friends, Riley and Jen. Riley's the Black woman and Jen is the white woman, and they've reconnected. Riley has just moved back to Philadelphia, where they grew up and where they were childhood friends. And Riley has started a big job at the local station in Philadelphia, which is a real coup for her career. And they've gotten together in chapter 1 at a bar, as friends do, and they're reconnecting. And then in that moment, Jen learns that Kevin, her husband, has been involved in an incident at work. That's, as much as she knows going into this chapter. So I'll just read a little bit from that. In my dreams, I never see it happen. Never see Kevin get shot. Never see my husband splayed out on the pavement, bleeding out. The nightmares always begin in the morgue, a scene straight out of Law and Order, a freezing room with puke green walls. He's lying on a metal table when I arrive. No matter how hard I try, I can never touch him. My arms are glued to my sides, and I can only stare at his dead body. I've had that dream once a week since he started at the academy. The truth is, I never wanted to be a cop's wife. When I met Kevin, he sold internet ads for a living. Good, safe, stable, boring. Thinking back on it now, I should have known better. The way Kevin had told me so proudly on our first date that he came from a long line of police officers. Even Kevin's younger brother, Matt, had recently joined the force. But in the next breath, Kevin insisted he liked it at Comcast, that if he left, it would be to become an entrepreneur, maybe design an app or something. The type of vague, grandiose shit you can get away with saying when you're in your 20s and have bright blue eyes and a head full of floppy curls that I kept wanting to run my hands through. I wanted to be something bigger back then too, whatever that meant. My number one goal was to get the hell out of waitressing ASAP. I was so sick of working at Fat Tuesday, slinging watered down margaritas to drunk sports fans who grabbed my ass. I wanted to get a degree or start some sort of business, maybe get my real estate license so I could flip houses. The details didn't matter so much. My single goal in life could be summed up pretty simply. Whatever you do not turn into Lou. That's her mother. And then there was Kevin, banner ad selling Kevin, who had his own apartment with framed pictures on the wall and a real couch and a good salary, health insurance. And all I could think of was this. I want this. I had always had this feeling that the life I wanted was out there. And I was just waiting for it to arrive like a bus or waiting for someone like Kevin to arrive. A year later, we got married and life was going to be stable and safe and maybe even a little boring, just like I wanted. Obviously, her life, this is page 28. Her life is anything but boring from this point forward.
That is true. And I remember very well, if you would like to talk about what aspects of your fiction are ripped from reality, the first man that I dated who had a proper couch and not a futon. I was like, I should marry this guy. So before I begin the section, I'm going to read from Riley's point of view, and Riley is the Black woman. I just want to give a little bit more context to move the story forward without giving any spoilers. So Riley and Jen have been best friends since they were little girls, really young. And they grew up together in the same like lower class, working class section of Philadelphia. And Jen, as you just heard, grows up to, she's had kind of a hard knocks life. She had a mom who was not everything she wanted a mom to be. She just wanted stability. And so she married Kevin, who went from selling banner ads to being a cop like his dad. And Riley went on to go to college, like a really fancy college, and she became a television newscaster and has been traveling all over the country. And like Christine said, she just made it back to Philadelphia. It's the first time these longtime friends have been back in the same city. And at the end of that first chapter, we find out that Jen's husband, Kevin, who's a police officer, shot an unarmed Black teenager. And the rest of the book is what happens to this friendship when they're confronted with this tragedy that so many of us have only read about in the headlines. So I'm skipping all the way ahead to chapter 11. Now we're going to page 206. And these two women have been like just grappling with what to say to each other and how to talk about this. And they exchange, so much of the conversation is then exchanged over text or emails, which is how we now communicate in our modern world. And Jen says something like, I'm just hoping this is going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And Riley is like, Jen, how can you believe that anything will be okay? A young boy was shot. And so this opens from Riley's point of view. That last email to Jen has sat unsent in my drafts folder for days, and it's begging to be sent. So are the 10 other emails that I've drafted to her since then. Some long rants, some are heartfelt. One that was just a sentence. What the hell, Jenny? But each time I go to press send, I stop myself. I tell myself it's because an email is a cop-out. I tell myself it's because I don't want to escalate things. I tell myself it's because I just don't have the time right now to deal with the fallout. And frankly, it is easier just to tiptoe. I tell myself that I'm being generous and giving her space right now. I can bide my time and this will go away and somehow things will go back to the way they were, or some version of it. Of all these excuses, this last one is the biggest lie. Things can't go back to the way they were because I'm too upset. That last message from Jen, her optimistic attitude, like she and Kevin can just put a dead kid behind them and move on. It broke something in me. I mean, I get it. Of course, she doesn't want her husband to go to prison. She wants her life to return to normal. I want these things for her too. Or I should want them. I want to want them. But there's a
Wow.
part of me, hold on, I was just skimming down the page. But there's a part of me, deep and primal, that keeps returning to the fact that an innocent kid died. It may all be a tragic accident, but there need to be consequences. That's it.
Wow, really great, fabulous. But okay, I have to ask the thing that, so who wrote which part? Because now I'm confused, or did you decide to read the other's part? Or you don't want to know us to know?
No.
It's not a secret at
We
all.
talk about it all the time.
We both wrote both parts. So
Mhm.
it wasn't like I, as the Black woman, took the Black character and Joe, as the white woman, took the white character. We had a hand in both of us, in all the character development, every sentence, every scene.
Hold on, I've got to mute Kim. So sorry.
I'm like, what is Kim watching in the background?
I'm like, is that Law and Order?
Okay, it went off. So okay, that's a good
So we
point.
both wrote both, yeah.
We both
Okay.
wrote both. Yeah. And it was really important, but I think we've done this reading. This is actually only the second time during our tour that we've done this reading, but we were kind of intentional that I was going to read Riley's part and Christine was going to read Jen's, because it is, a lot of people come to this book with a lot of assumptions. They're like, you wrote the Black character, you wrote the white character. And we think that that is such a great example of how we all come to everything with assumptions and preconceived notions. And the whole point of this book was to shake those up and get us out of our comfort zones.
Well, that's brilliant then, because you're right. It's one of those things, and I think that you both do such a, I mean, in the book, you do such a great job of looking at the huge issue, the cops killing Black men, but then those small little things that wound or distance each other, that so many of us don't recognize. And I say that as a white woman, that I would say that mostly it's white people who don't recognize, because we haven't had to.
And that's exactly it, G. That's why we wanted to write the book that focuses, first of all, that we wanted to write a novel, right? Because fiction is just a more accessible, relatable way in. You can have more empathy for characters, more connection to them than if you're just reading nonfiction or reading headlines or statistics or facts or figures. It just doesn't hit you the same way, right? And so we definitely wanted it to be a novel, and we definitely wanted it to be intimate. Race can be an abstraction, or it can be distant, or it can be, for the 30,000 foot level, it can feel overwhelming. But if you're just seeing actually how it plays out between two people who, have this friendship and this relationship, and you see all of the dynamics there, it, I think, makes it easier to understand or witness, or to say, I mean, we want readers to read this and say, oh my God, I didn't know that, or I didn't see that, or, oh, that's a perspective, or, oh, wow, when that happens, I could see how someone would feel that way. Right. Yeah. And those are the little things we're trying to get across.
Well, you did a great job. And you also did a great job. Talk about good timing. I mean, you obviously wrote this before George Floyd and all that, but how did it come about? I mean, and the point is, I think that this has been going on for a long time. It's not just George Floyd, but you've really captured a moment in our culture when we have to be looking at this. How did it all come about then?
Yeah, you want me to do our meet cute? Do you want to do it?
Sure. And then I'll jump in.
All right, I'll start. I'm going to start by apologizing to the entire group, because I have to leave earlier than I expected. I'm in New York right now because Christine and I have been doing stuff together all day, and I have to catch a train home to be there because both of my babies, I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, are sick. With every child has a cold right now because they didn't get colds last year. So I'm gonna have to relieve my husband. So when I sign off, no, it is just with love for this whole group, and Christine will pick up the slack.
No, that's why there's 2 of us.
That's why there's 2 of us. Yeah, exactly. So Christine was my, much like Jeannie, she was my editor at Simon & Schuster. She edited my last novel, Charlotte Walsh, and we just really hit it off and we became fast friends, which I think is kind of rare for women in adulthood to find new friends. Like after a certain age, it's like, do I want to bring another friend on? Do I like you enough to do this? And we had that spark, and we worked together on another project for the TV show Younger. We wrote a really quickie novel in 4 weeks called Marriage Vacation. And just, I know there's some younger fans here because there's always younger fans.
Yeah.
And we wrote that so fast and so furious that we're like, we love writing together. We want to keep doing this. And Christine had the seed of an idea for a long time, and it's very like related to her personal experiences and from everything that was going on. You know, everyone brings up George Floyd when we do these interviews, but police have been shooting Black men since there were police and Black men. And there were so many shootings at the time in the media that, I mean, the headlines were nonstop. And so Christine couldn't help but think, what happens if one of the many white women I know were intimately involved, like her husband was intimately involved, and like, what would I do in that situation? What would happen to our friendship? And when she said that to me for the first time, it really gave me chills, because I had also just come off Charlotte Walsh, which is a fun book, but it's a book about being a woman in the world and the political and politics and being a woman trying to run for Senate. I'm like, all I want to do next is write about puppies or a book group that drinks rosé. But I'm like, no, let's tackle race next. that feels right. But I was just so inspired by that kernel and how we could start this conversation. So when we turned the book in a week, or the final draft a week before George Floyd was murdered.
Wow.
And so when the conversation pivoted, Christine and I had already been having these conversations that all of a sudden the world is having, that Christina's been having her whole life. But again, like Jeannie, as you said, that I think a lot of white people simply hadn't had before. We hadn't had to do it. We were scared to do it. We didn't know if we would say the right thing. I know when Christine and I first started talking about race, I was very nervous and anxious, not because I didn't want to talk about it, but because I was scared of offending her or saying the wrong thing or sounding stupid. But so, yeah, by the time George Floyd came around, we had just already been doing this for so long that it almost doesn't feel like an inciting incident for us anymore, because we're like, we had been working on this book for so long, and we actually didn't change much of the book because we'd already been having those conversations that everyone started having after George Floyd.
But in a way, we feel like this book came out at exactly the right time. This has been a long publishing journey, a pandemic, twists and turns, a racial awakening. A lot has happened since we started writing this book, which is the understatement of the year. I'm like, a few things have happened over the last year. Remember we felt like 2016 was going to be the most dramatic year ever? It just felt like that was the peak of all we could handle. That was it. Little did we know. But we do feel fortunate almost that this book is coming out now, because it does feel like people are more primed, vulnerable, open, hungry to have these kind of conversations than they would have been even if we published this book in 2018, in 2019, And so this is great. Like now that it's been out in the world and we're seeing the reaction and the reception and the way it proved our instincts right, that people are going to want to have these conversations, and the book is arriving hopefully just in time to be a part of that process.
And I should say that it's a Good Morning America book club selection and an Amazon October 2021 book of the month, or their honor, which is shows that people are appreciating what you're trying to do. I just wonder, I don't normally ask writers about their process because, it's just so personal, but I have to ask because I've never written something with somebody.
Yeah.
And that to me is fascinating, what the process on this was.
Yeah, we all let Christine start, but we also love this question. Like, we love talking about our process and hearing other writers' process, because I think writing is a really lonely thing. So I just love this part of the conversation. But Christine, you start.
And it's funny because we didn't have a process, I was Joe's editor, so that's a thing in and of itself. And that's kind of an established relationship. Like editors might have a different style, but like, what the process is the process, right? And then when Joe and I wrote Marriage Vacation, that was like boundary breaking and time, I mean, that was just like, we got through it. And so there wasn't a lot we could apply from that even into our new collaboration. And so we were building it from scratch, and it was a lot of trial and error and figuring out how we were going to do it. I mean, I had never written a book before, and Joe had written a lot of books. So there was like kind of that dynamic. And then we had to figure out the logistics, like the technical logistics. We never lived in the same place at the same time. Joe was in San Francisco when we started this book, and I'm in New York. We had to figure out what our creative process was going to be, so there was a lot, there was a big learning curve. So in the beginning, we really stuck more to our previous roles and then kind of evolved from there. So Joe has been a writer. When you read her bio, she's written 5,000 books. I can't keep track, but she's not new to this rodeo. And so she was less daunted than I was about just facing the blank page and putting words on the page.
It's just scary for everyone, unless you were a tabloid news reporter in New York City in the late 90s, early 2000s, and you're like, I have to bang out 800 words a copy by 5 o'clock or I'm getting fired.
Yeah, pressure's on.
Yeah.
So we started with a really, really detailed outline that we both worked on together. So we knew, especially the structure of the book is back and forth, each chapter balanced between two characters. Riley takes a chapter, Jen takes a chapter. So we had to really get the mechanics and the structure down first and foremost. Mm-hmm. And then we just went into a Google Doc and, filled in, I'm going to take this scene. I'm going to write a scene. You go in to look at the scene and make comments. I go back in. So some of it was changing the text itself in the document and track changes or what have you. And then we also had a whole conversation going in the comments itself. Like, what do you think of this? Or should we change this to this? And that way we could work a lot on our own time in different time frames and with other projects, especially, keep in mind, when we started this book, I was still working full time at Simon & Schuster with a demanding job, and Joe has a million projects on the side and children. And, we had a lot going on other than this. So we could then just do it nights, weekends. I could go in, whenever we could, but still chip away and make progress. And slowly but surely we settled into a rhythm that worked for us. And then every few chapters where there were bigger things to talk about, then we would hop on the phone and talk them through. This was, if you had told me the word Zoom at the time, I would have said, to go fast somewhere? Yes. Yeah. We had no knowledge of Zoom. And so we were doing old school things like talking on the phone.
we tried Google Hangouts, and that was like, I remember we just like, Christine's like, I'm calling you, and I'm like, I don't see it ringing, this isn't working. Like, it was, we were very tech challenged.
We were.
I want to just say to everyone here that if you want to write some questions, please do it in chat, and then I'll call on you when we get to the question and answer part. So I'm sure there are questions, because every time I blink my eye, I've got another one. But what I wonder is, since you talked about the book is about conversations. Part of it is about conversations about race that we don't have. What were some of your conversations, you personally, that might have opened both of you up in different ways?
How much time do we have before I have to go to Kitty's
Joe's definitely going to miss her train.
Okay.
Well, let me start, because I am going to have to run fairly soon. I'm not worried about Christine answering all the questions, because we share a brain at this point. We literally like.
What if I just go rogue, Joe, and I just like.
You never go rogue.
The truth is.
I'm the only one that goes rogue in these situations. I go rogue with one thing on every call.
That's true.
But we're trying to be really honest in all of our talks about what our conversations looked like, how much it strained our own relationship, because we did come to this as new friends, work friends who had not talked about race because we were work friends. And again, race is like this third rail of things we don't talk about and we don't touch on. I knew about every bad ex-boyfriend Christine had before we'd ever had any conversations about race, because it makes so much so many people uncomfortable. You don't know how to bring it up. What is the right in to do that? And so I had to get very, very comfortable with being uncomfortable as a white woman that had grown up in very, very white spaces. Christine is my first very close Black female friend. You know, I have a lot of acquaintances. I have people that I get drinks with, you know, moms at school, things like that. But someone that I like will like go on vacation with or like go on a road trip with, which Christine did go on a road trip with me for my last book, through the American South, which necessarily brought up a lot of conversations about race.
Yeah.
As did me playing John Denver for Christine for the first time.
It's a real cultural exchange.
Well, and going to Dollywood.
You
We did
can't
all the
name
things.
one John Denver song, and I'm like, yeah, no.
No, I
Yeah.
can't. And so once we started talking, like I realized that I wanted to talk about race, but like I said before, I was scared. But Christine translated a lot of that nervousness as apathy and a willingness to not go there. And I had to tell her, no, I'm scared. Like I'm anxious that I will say the wrong thing. And you see that with our characters, they have this silence. Riley doesn't want to be the Black woman always bringing up race. Jen doesn't want to say the wrong thing. But Jen also has never thought about race in terms of Riley. One, because, you know, there's a lot that she just doesn't know, but two, because she sees Riley as the lucky one. Riley has the great family. She's beautiful. She's smart. She goes to college. She has the good job. Jen sees herself as the one who like had this hard knocks life. So she's like, what trauma has Riley ever gone through? And Riley hides that from Jen for a lot of the reasons that we hide all of our shit from our friends, right? That have nothing to do with race. We just don't want to admit like the bad stuff that happens to us because we don't always want to be the downer. But an interesting story that I like to bring up when we're talking about how did we navigate certain things about race. In the very beginning, when we like just written out Riley and who she was as a character, she was very, very perfect. Like everything about her was perfect. She had no flaws. And to me, because I've written so much fiction before, I wanted her to be more complicated than that. I'm like, no one likes a perfect character. And so, you know, with Charlotte Walsh, my last character, who was this rich white woman running for Senate, I was like, she has a brother with an opioid addiction and her like a deadbeat father, and she had a teenage pregnancy. It was like all these things that like just made her a more complicated real woman in the world. And so I said to Christine, I'm like, let's make Riley's family a little less perfect. Maybe her dad has an affair, or maybe she had a teenage pregnancy or is sleeping with a married man. And Christine was very against giving Riley like some of these traits, and she wanted her to be a certain way because she didn't want to attach any tropes or stereotypes that typically do get attached to Black women in popular culture. And for me, I didn't see it that way at all. I was like, no, this isn't about race. This is about creating a character. And Christine is like, no, it is about race. And why can't you see it's about race? And
Wow.
I do think that was the conversation that like made us get into it, really. Because for me, I did not see it that way. And I fought it and I got defensive. And we had to then be like, we can't continue like this. We have to. And I said, you have to give me grace sometimes because I might mess up. And Christine said, okay, but like, I have to call it out when I have to call it out. And so we had to get to that point. And it was not an aha kumbaya kind of moment. It was 2 years of going through this, but we did it. And we're just such better friends now. And we do this together all day long. So
Yeah. I really applaud that. But I mean, and this, you know, it makes me think, wow, I wish I had people to go into that with and learn from. So I think that's and maybe you can say, Christine, I mean, I know that you're not preachy. This book is not preachy at all. So, but maybe just something that just like I know it's, I think white people get, never mind. I probably shouldn't ask that. What can we do?
No, Jeannie, ask it. No, ask it. That's the thing.
Okay.
Like I feel like we do get tongue tied and we get nervous, right? And I'm like, just ask it. Like there's grace here. This is a space to talk.
Yes. So Christine,
Yeah, well, I think the one thing, and this is why Joe and I are so honest about our personal story too, and there's such an interesting conversation both on the page with our characters and off the page, in the making of the book, if you will. But it's, you have to be willing to go there and ask all the questions and talk about all of the things, right? And so some of that is that people don't have somebody to talk about these things with, which is real. Like, we live in a really socially segregated society. And so it's really, I think, a matter of, and this is, where we hope the book comes in handy, it's a matter of then sharing conversations like these and talking about the book, and then using your personal experience, using the book as a springboard to talk about your personal experience, right? And so, I mean, in the making of the book, that was a springboard for me to talk to Joe about a lot of these issues, right? Like the one she just talked about, where, she didn't understand what was at stake for this character, and she didn't understand how problematic it is to have such little representation, that one character is representative, right? And that my steadfastness about staying away from common trope, there's complexities, but then there's like pregnancy, drugs, all the pathology of that people pathologize the Black community. And I think a lot of it was also, this idea of like, who is really Black, or what does it really mean to be Black, and creating a real Black experience, right? And like, those are some unconscious tropes that go into it. Like, we want this character to be real, and real Black people are like X, Y, Z, and it's just, it's a very.
And I will say that one did not come from me though.
No, I'm just saying in general.
But that one did come from one of our early white readers did say, I don't buy Riley's family, or like, is Riley Black enough? And that is thing.
I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you hear when you're writing a book about race, and it's really that part. And I think, Jeannie, to your question, I think that really drills down to, because that part is really hard for a Black person, right? Especially in the context of, this is my job. So there's this idea of, sure, everybody gets grace, and this is a learning curve, and we have to talk about these things. People are going to say things, and then you have to talk about it. But at the same time, hearing things like that is very problematic and painful and offensive, right? And so you have to have then this balance of how you're going to react, and then how they're going to react, and it becomes a very dangerous cycle. And so,
it's a tightrope. Yeah, it's exhausting.
So I think that, using this book, we really want people, if you say, what can I do, or what can I, talking to other people and sharing with other people of different cultural experiences and backgrounds, I think really does help, both opening up and asking them questions. And that can be awkward to do at the pickup line at school, right? Hey, so,
did you like The Bachelor last night?
Did you like your aggression
about
today?
Systemic racism.
Yeah, like don't do that maybe, but talking about the book, right? And these characters, and saying like, when this happened, it felt this way because I feel like I've done that before and I didn't realize, or I wasn't even aware on page 22 when this happened, why that would be problematic. Like, that's crazy, so that's what we're hoping
easier. It's just an easier way in.
Absolutely. And I see this with book club, going to book clubs, and book clubs having like these really important discussions, but probably I bet a lot of them are all white book clubs or something, and it's too bad there's not.
Well, my last thing before I leave and I have to leave you guys. I'm putting on my backpack. I'm going to the train.
Okay.
We are, and I'll let Christine finish explaining it, but we're trying to pair together Black book clubs with white book clubs, individual white readers with Black readers, so that they can have conversations about how everyone felt about the book. We are now Tinder for readers. And Christine will explain how everyone can reach us. And I'm going to run, and I'm going to go see these babies. But thank you.
See your babies. Hug them. Thank you so much, Joe.
Bye, guys.
Fabulous. Tell us about this.
Pressure to now speak for two.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but to your point, it's interesting that we know that different readers are going to have different reactions to this book, and that the conversations that would be happening in All Black. Does she know that her screen is still on? Hey, Joe, your screen is still on.
I can stop it.
Your screen is.
Oh, I
still
stopped it.
on. Oh, she couldn't get enough.
Oh, okay.
That the conversations that would be happening in all Black book clubs are very different than the conversations that would be having in all white book clubs, right? Like different people are going to take different things and have different reactions to the book. And that's why the richest will be to get different kinds of book clubs together. But also, which I was talking about too with the buddy read, is bringing individuals together. So we set up it's very grassroots, but we set up a spreadsheet, if you will, that you can reach out to us, and Joe's handling the direct messages on Instagram if you want to be matched with a buddy reader that's in a different state, different ethnicity, different, and it's kind of like a pen pal, but that you'd read the book with. So you'd both buy the book, and then, we'd introduce you, and then you'd come up with a time, let's talk about this in a month to give
That's
people time.
fabulous. It's
And then-
so fabulous.
And sometimes I think it's also the beauty of it is, and we'll see how it plays out because we just kind of developed this on the fly, but I think you also have a different conversation within book clubs of people than a stranger almost, right?
Right.
And I think this develops into a relationship potentially, but you also may never see this person again. And that gives you, I think, a safer space to talk about things that you might not talk about with your coworker that you're going to see every day, potentially, as long as you have this job,
Right. Tell me, where can people find out more about that?
So we're keeping everything updated about the book and all of our events and developments on social media, mainly through Instagram. So I'm at C Pride, just C and then my last name, Pride. And then Joe is at Joe Piazza, author, her full name, and then author. So once you follow us, you can be in contact with us directly, and you can find out like when we're doing different events, IG lives, events like this, where different types of people are gathering to have a conversation.
Okay, good. I wrote those in the chat.
Great.
Their Instagram, because I think it's brilliant, because we all want to learn and open ourselves up, and this is a great way to do that.
Well, Joe and I have been on tour, and we've been talking about doing the book clubs, and even having our publisher help us bring big book clubs together. You know how they have these like kind of national book clubs. But we finished an event, and it's like 11 p.m. at night, and I'm scrolling through Instagram, and I see Joe announce that we're doing this. So I'm all for the idea, but I was like, oh, that's how I also learned that this was happening last, I think, Wednesday night. She's like, guys, out there, Christine and I. It's like,
and you're like, what? Well, I imagine that we'll see that. I mean, unless it already has a story somewhere. I mean, I haven't heard of this kind of thing.
Well, we're just starting, and because a lot of our publicity and promotion, and since we're doing this book club with GMA, right, which is the idea to bring a lot of Americans who watch morning TV, together for these kind of conversations. And so we're in talks with them to sort of figure out how this can also play out on the on the smaller scale, but also, we want to hear people's stories too. So once this happens, or you start reading with somebody else, even if it's not Joe and I who match you, but in a book club, or, we want to hear through social media about the outcomes and the impact of this, because we think even amplifying those stories, right, then also helps other people. Like, then it's just not about us, it's about a readership, and then a readership can be sharing stories of, I reconnected with a high school friend who, we'd had a falling out because she said XYZ, but now we talked, and whatever kind of comes to fruition from these conversations.
Well, we have a question from Elizabeth Ralston, and who's my sister-in-law.
Oh, it's a family affair tonight. I love it.
Yeah, and she wants to know, I think Joe said this, but so we'll ask you, did you grow up with a best friend, a white friend, a different race?
Yeah, it's interesting because Joe and I came at this with very different experience, having met in our 40s. So Joe actually went to an all white Catholic school all through. There were actually no kids of color or anything other in her schools, and it was in an all-white suburb of Philadelphia. I grew up outside of DC in the Maryland suburbs, which is just a more diverse. Those suburbs are more diverse potentially than the Philly suburbs. And so I met, who's still my best friend, Julie. We met in first grade. And then I met another close white friend, Becky, when I was 14. So both, childhood formative relationships. And so along with my Black friends, right, like I have had long-term relationships, interracial relationships, but I think a hallmark of those relationships have been that we have talked about race. I mean, not in first grade, but,
Right.
like over time, we have talked about race, that makes it a little different than Jen and Riley. And I was surprised to a degree in publishing this book and even talking to now that it's been in the world, talking to other people who have an interracial friendship or marriage. I mean, people saying, or, white people having Black children for, adoption or whatever, and say that they don't talk about race. I mean, it's just kind of mind blowing to me that you can have these intimate relationships and not talk about race, because that was one of the things that I told Joe early on. Aside from our professional relationship, if we were going to have a close friendship, then this would have to be something that we talked about. Otherwise, this is always going to be like a big unspoken thing between us. And that you can't be close to somebody as a Black person, at least I'll speak for myself, without, talking about race. But at the same time, when I met Julie and when I met Becky, we were young, that I knew their families. We came up together. I knew their past. I knew their histories. I sat at their family dinner table. Joe, and I write about this in a piece I wrote for The Stylist, Joe to me was a wild card, right? Like, I don't know who her family is. I don't know what she has in her past. I don't know if she went to a sorority party in blackface 10 years ago. I just have no way of knowing these things in the way that I would with my other friends that I met younger. And that is a real leap of faith for a Black person, right? Like, to say, like, who are you really? You got to build that trust over time to understand, where that person comes from. It's not a guarantee, you can't assume.
Well, I wonder if anybody, I'm sure some of our people in the audience have had, friends of a different race growing up, and it would be great to, we don't have a lot of time, but maybe if you want to put something in that and maybe discuss what how you experienced that, and how hearing Christine and Joe talk, adds to that.
Yeah, I would love for people.
Yeah, enriches that. In the meantime, if people want to do that, but in the meantime, did you have any publishers hesitant about publishing? Because I mean, I know that some they get real nervous. Publishers can get real nervous about controversial books. So I don't.
Yeah. It's funny, I was still working at SNS when this book went on submission in fall 2018, and we didn't know what kind of reactions we were going to get, right? Like, I mean, it just, you sit on the other side, and I could kind of anticipate what editors might say. And I mean, we did a relatively small submission. And Joe remembers this more than I do. I don't have a clear memory of this, but that time was a little bit of a blur, and very stressful, just in terms of,
yeah,
it's kind of a secret, and then it's out with your colleagues.
Oh God. Oh yeah.
It was a lot going on for me personally, just in terms of working in-house. Yeah. And I have a funny story about that I was in, the Simon & Schuster offices are in Rockefeller Center in New York City, and connecting all the buildings is an underground mall with food and go grab Hale and Hardy or whatever at lunch. So a lot of people went down there, and during the auction phase, where publishers are trying to decide how much money they're going to pay for a book, and that can last a couple days as everybody's getting back. And this was happening, and when our editor Lindsay Sagnet had it at SNS, and her boss is Libby, who I adore both of them, and during this process I saw them in the concourse, and I was like, this is going to be too awkward if we have to like talk.
Right.
So I literally ducked behind a pole like it was a rom-com. I was like, and I literally hid. And I was like, oh, I'm so smooth. And then at our book launch party on Tuesday, I told this story to them, and I'm like, oh my God, it's so crazy. Like, you know, all these years later. And they were like, oh, no, we definitely saw you. And I was like, oh, whoops. I thought I was so tricky. But to circle back to the question, Joe remembers in one of our meetings, we did a lot of calls with publishers, and Joe remembers one of the publishers saying, you know, this feels like a thing now, police shootings, you know, but by the time the book comes out, is this book going to be timely, or is this book going to be, you know? So I think we did get some pushback like that. And sending it abroad, we, you know, our agent had done a submission globally, right? Because I mean, the book just came out in the UK today, but she got a pass letter from a German publishing house that said, we don't have racism here. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that was the subtext of the letter. Like, our readership won't relate to this because, and I'm like, wow, pot kettle Germany. All right.
Yeah, really? Oh
bold statement. So there were things like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's kind of, it sounds like there's how people react is to the book.
Yeah, I'm reading the comments too.
Yeah. So here we have Rosemary Guzman Hook. Do you want to just say your experience? Where, if you can unmute yourself. There.
Oh, yeah, it was kind of going back to that original thing you had mentioned. I think that Christine, so I mean, I have some you know, childhood friends, but they live in a whole other state. But I think really, because I live in Austin, it was just so refreshing when I moved here from Michigan to have other women that look like me, and not everyone just have an assumption, you know, stereotypes, a lot of stereotyping in the Midwest. And so
I went to the University of Missouri, so I know.
yeah. So, but I think to the point of there are, when we're having conversations now, you know, we're adults, you know, professionals, etc. There are certain things that I just don't feel comfortable sharing with white friends. That there are certain things that my, you know, my Latina girlfriends, I don't have to explain to them. They know exactly what I'm talking about. And so, you know, I think partially it's, you know, both sides have to kind of figure that out, you know, together, but it does make a difference. So I think I like the whole idea of making sure that you're kind of testing your readers, you know, to the point of the one that was like, is that character enough of, I mean, we had, you know, we elected a president that people said wasn't Black enough. And I'm like, wow. So, but only that community could say it because it meant something.
Yep.
So anywho, that was why I kind of I tossed that in there, because it is. And I wish I could be more articulate as to.
No, I mean, I totally get it. And I think that this is something when you read the book, which I hope you do, but when this is something that we deal with, that exact thing with Riley and Riley's friendship, because she does have a really close Black friend and she does see the difference in those relationships. And I see this in my life as close as I can be. And I feel equally close to, let's say, my best friend Felicia, who's a Black woman, and Julie, who I mentioned, you know, who I've known since first grade, or, you know, that there's no, I love one more than the other, or there's nothing there except that there is a common experience that Felicia and I share that no matter what will bond us to each other, because you can walk in somebody's shoes. And that's not to say that, and I'm sure you don't do this, Rosemary, that's not to say that we're holding it against our white friends. Like, it's not their fault that they, you know, cannot have these experiences, but it does when you don't have to explain something to somebody, when you can say 2 words, like this happened, and you don't have to even field follow-up questions about, anything. It's just like, oh God, I know, like, and then somebody shares, there's just a connection there and a bond. And so
But you
that
can,
is,
yeah, you
real.
can still have a bond, but it just is, takes a little more.
it takes
work
more
for other
work. It
things,
really
yeah.
does. It takes more work. And Joe and I's whole mentality and mission is that even though it took more work for Joe and I to become friends than it took for me to become friends with Felicia, just to
Yeah.
use a comparison, a Black woman. But that doesn't make it wrong or invalid or not worth it or why bother. It's just different. And we can't expect any of our relationships to be identical in terms of their ease or connection, right? Like that's unrealistic too. And I think one of the things that Joe and I are really proud of is that we could have, in tough moments when we were having these earlier conversations that were fraught, it's very easy to be like, well, never mind. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
she doesn't get me. This is too hard. And, F this, and why am I going to bother? And blah, blah, like all the things that we tell ourselves. I mean, we were contractually obligated to write a book together. So there was some motivation to push through that, but we also felt we wanted to practice what we preach. If we were going to write a book about race, and we made this decision to invest, as you know, Jeannie, a lot of time and energy in writing a book, like it takes a lot out of you, then it had to be meaningful.
Right.
There had to be something that came out of it that felt larger than the book itself. And that was our relationship.
And I think you've created something that will be larger than because you will, facilitate conversations, small and large, through, and I think it's fabulous. Lisa or Elizabeth, do you want to talk about what you wrote for your kids?
I grew up in a really very white town and a very white background, but my children are in Virginia in an area with a lot of military families, and they're very interracial. Our church was also very multicultural. Their school was very multicultural. And my husband and I made a very concerted effort to make our home an open space for all kinds of different children. And I think that's so important. And I think that one of the great things about your book, and I'm going to read it, is because if we make a concerted effort to make friends, to get to know people, it's going to change going forward. So,
but I think what
Thank
you
you.
said, that was so, thank you. I think what you said about that's so important too, is effort. And I think that it has to feel like this is going to be worthwhile, right? And a lot
Right.
of, I think that I had a misconception, and this is something that I caught to, that a lot of white people, to generalize, were not talking about race, or not engaging these conversations. Again, this is pre-George Floyd,
Mhm.
because of a certain apathy, right? Because like, it doesn't
Right.
affect me. I don't have to do anything. I can just live in my world, and oh, well, that's happening elsewhere.
Right.
Now I'm more learning that it is more of a question of, how do I do this, right? Like you said, like you have to take steps to foster
Right.
an environment where other people feel comfortable coming into it, and vice versa, where you might be the only person in a room at a church event, at a work event, and
Right.
how you deal with that. And that is stepping out of your comfort zone. And I think, people, it's less a question of apathy potentially, and more a question of fear and discomfort, and it's easier to stay in your comfort zone, and that's not going to
Exactly.
get us anywhere. And so Joe and I could have easily retreated to our comfort zones and decided not to write this book. Like,
Exactly.
we day
Mhm.
jobs. I could have, stayed at Simon & Schuster and worked there for the rest of my life. But we made a different choice. And I think now we have to see like the choices that we're making. Like, why are you going to this church? Why are you sending your kids to this school? Why are you participating in this activity on the weekends? And who is it
Right.
putting you in the path with? And then what kind of conversations are you engaging with?
Right.
Yeah, we're running out of time, but I'm gonna just say, as you're talking, I'm thinking.
Lorraine Glennon, I'm so sorry. Lorraine, hi. Oh my God. Everybody's in their little mailboxes.
Don't you love Lorraine?
Of course, this is such a reunion. Every Zoom I've had, this is like such a sidebar, but every Zoom that I've had, like book event, there is like some random like super fun person from the past. You know what I mean? It's like a game of This Is Your Life. Like my first grade teacher. I mean, it's just like people pop up and it's so fun. So it's so good to see you, Lorraine. It's been years and years.
Yeah, Lorraine is. Oh, you're muted.
Oh, you're
Lorraine.
on mute.
Oh, she's just doing. I'm just going to say one thing real quick because of what it.
I love the book.
There you go. You're. It's good to have you, Lorraine. And Lorraine is such a good editor herself and writer. So whenever and we have another edit. We probably have a lot of editors, but Kathy Hanauer's here too.
I know. I see. I mean, I don't see Kathy, but I see Kathy.
Yeah.
Love Kathy.
We love Kathy. I'm just going to say one quick thing that what this has made me think of is I lived 4 years in Mexico, and I was determined to become part of the local community. And one thing I did is I joined the PTA at the bilingual school where my kids went, and I wasn't good at Spanish, but I went and pushed myself because I thought that's the way I can learn Spanish. So we would have all these meetings, and everyone there, all the other people could speak English, but I said, please just speak Spanish, please speak Spanish. So, and that's how I got more integrated. It's very different, but I remember, but when you're talking
I think it's similar. Like you have to, it would have been easy for you to force everyone to assimilate to you, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like to change them. And it would be easy for you not to get involved, right? Or you could have found an all white expat community in Mexico for sure. You know,
Right.
People do that all the time. And so I think that's a good example of a conscious choice. So like when you go to someplace, like how are you, whether to live, to move, to, you know, what your office even, our office places are probably our most diverse places because, you know, it's not solely self-selection, right? You can choose what church you go to, your school, you know, but where you live, but your office is a little more egalitarian in that way. And so that's a place maybe to foster a relationship with, you know, not to find somebody that's exactly like you at the office, even though that's hard because like attracts like, but to figure out, you know, how to make some different connections. And please use the book, you know, like saying, I hear this book is really good. Do you want to read it together and like talk about it is like, I don't know. I feel like it's a great intro. I'd be super happy if somebody, you know, wanted to read a book with me and talk about it, you know, provided they were another book person. I think that'd be cool.
I think it's great. Well, you've made all of us think and open our minds some. And when you read this, if you haven't yet, you're going to really, and making it so personal really allows you to get into an issue, which I think a lot of us sort of freeze up, as we've been talking about. So instead of freezing up, start by reading the book. Yeah. And then you can work from there. And please, you know, follow Christine and Joe on Instagram, and maybe you'll get matched up. You can get matched up. I just think that's the most brilliant idea. And I thank you so much, Christine, and we thank Joe.
Oh my God,
and
thank you.
if you want to unmute to say thank you to Christine, you can, because it's just we're so happy. And
special group of women. I'm so happy.
Thank you.
Thinking about relationships that you make in this business. I mean, Jeannie, we met
2007.
Yeah, 15 years ago. I mean, it really, and you know, Lorraine, like, I mean, it's been forever. And then I know you through Kathy. I mean, there's just like always great connections when you have a great group of women. So thank you so much for having Joe and I tonight. It was really wonderful.
We'll continued good luck. We'll watch the book as it climbs the bestseller list. I have very good feelings about that. So, and congratulations on everything. And thank all of you for coming. It's really
thank you, Christine.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Christine.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
Bye.